Two cops tore up a single dad's complaint in front of his daughter, then the chief made the whole station stand and salute him. The complaint was still warm from the printer when Officer Mason grabbed it from the counter, tore it straight down the middle, and let the pieces fall onto the floor in front of the little girl. Her father stood frozen beside her, his hands trembling, not because he was afraid of the two officers, but because his daughter was watching everything. Then the second officer laughed and told him that men like him should stop wasting police time. What neither officer knew was that the quiet single father standing there with his 7-year-old daughter had spent years sacrificing everything to protect people who could never repay him. And before that day was over, the entire police station would be ordered to stand, face him, and salute. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that one good heart can change someone's life, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Bright Heart for more emotional stories that remind us that goodness is never wasted. Daniel Carter had learned early that life did not always reward people for doing the right thing. At 36, he was raising his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, alone in a small apartment above an old grocery store. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving Daniel with a mountain of grief and one promise he repeated every night before Lily went to sleep: no matter how difficult life became, she would always feel safe with him. Daniel worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. During the day, he repaired heating systems and plumbing for a local maintenance company, and several nights a week he delivered groceries until midnight. His clothes were often worn, his shoes were scratched, and exhaustion had become a permanent shadow beneath his eyes, but he never complained in front of Lily. Whenever she asked why he was so tired, he simply smiled and told her that being her dad was the most important job in the world. One rainy Tuesday evening, Daniel and Lily were walking home from the grocery store when they witnessed something that changed everything. A black SUV came speeding through a neighborhood intersection and nearly struck an elderly woman crossing the street. Daniel pulled Lily back just in time, but the vehicle crashed into a parked car and disappeared around the corner. Daniel immediately called the police and stayed with the frightened woman until an ambulance arrived. He remembered the vehicle's license plate because he had spent years working with machinery and had developed an unusual ability to remember numbers. When officers arrived, Daniel gave them every detail he could remember. But the next morning, he discovered that the driver was connected to a wealthy local businessman who had influence in the community. Daniel wasn't trying to become a hero. He simply wanted the police to investigate what had happened. That afternoon, Daniel took Lily with him to the police station because he couldn't afford to miss another shift by arranging childcare. Lily held her little teddy bear tightly against her chest as they approached the front desk. Daniel calmly explained that he wanted to submit a formal complaint and provide the license plate number he had written down. 2 officers standing behind the counter looked at him from head to toe. His faded jacket, old work boots, and tired face seemed to tell them everything they thought they needed to know. One officer impatiently flipped through the paperwork while the other leaned against the desk with an expression of annoyance. Daniel remained respectful, explaining that the matter was important because an elderly woman had nearly been killed. He expected at least a basic investigation. Instead, the officers treated him as if he were an inconvenience. When Daniel insisted that the report be officially recorded, the atmosphere suddenly changed. One officer snatched the complaint from his hand and accused him of making accusations without evidence. Daniel pointed toward the license plate number and explained that he had personally witnessed the vehicle. But the officer wasn't listening. He tore the complaint in half. Lily's eyes widened as the paper fell between them. Before Daniel could respond, the second officer took the remaining pieces and ripped them again, tossing them into a trash bin. They told Daniel to take his daughter home and stop wasting police resources. Daniel looked down at Lily, saw the fear in her eyes, and swallowed his anger. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply bent down, picked up the torn pieces from the floor, and placed them carefully into his pocket. Lily whispered that they should leave, and Daniel nodded. As they walked toward the exit, she asked why the officers didn't listen to him. Daniel struggled to answer because he knew that whatever he said would become part of the way she understood the world. He finally told her that sometimes people forget that every person deserves respect, no matter how much money they have or what clothes they wear. He told her that being treated badly didn't give them permission to become cruel themselves. But Daniel didn't know that someone else had witnessed what happened. At the far end of the station, a veteran dispatcher named Mrs. Evelyn Hart had seen everything through the glass partition. She had worked at the station for more than 20 years and recognized Daniel's name immediately. Months earlier, during a winter storm, Daniel had rescued an elderly couple trapped inside their freezing home. He had repaired their broken heating system without charging them because they couldn't afford it. Mrs. Hart had been one of the people who recommended him for a community service award, though Daniel never showed up to receive it because he had been taking Lily to the hospital that same evening. Evelyn knew that Daniel wasn't a troublemaker. He was the kind of man who helped people quietly and disappeared before anyone could thank him. She immediately sent an internal message to Chief Marcus Reynolds, who was attending a regional law enforcement meeting across town. She explained what she had witnessed and mentioned the license plate Daniel had provided. The chief asked her to verify the number. Within minutes, the situation became far more serious than anyone at the front desk realized. The vehicle Daniel had identified had been connected to several unresolved hit-and-run complaints. There had been missing reports, inconsistent records, and witnesses who had suddenly stopped cooperating. Daniel's torn complaint wasn't just a piece of paper. It could have been the missing link in an investigation that had been quietly buried for months. Chief Reynolds arrived at the station without announcing himself. He walked through the doors wearing his uniform, his expression completely different from the usual calm smile his officers knew. He asked for the two officers who had handled Daniel's complaint. When they appeared, they confidently explained that they had dealt with an unreasonable civilian who had no evidence. Then the chief placed the recovered pieces of Daniel's complaint on the desk. The room went silent. The chief had already reviewed the security footage. He had watched the officers tear up the report. He had watched Lily's frightened expression. He had watched Daniel pick up the pieces without insulting anyone or losing his temper. Then the chief revealed that the license plate Daniel had remembered matched the vehicle investigators had been searching for. The driver was being investigated for multiple offenses, and Daniel's testimony could finally move the case forward. But Chief Reynolds wasn't finished. He ordered the two officers to surrender their badges pending a formal investigation. Then he walked toward the station entrance and asked Daniel and Lily to return. Daniel arrived confused, believing he was being called back because there was another problem. Lily held his hand tightly as they entered. What happened next left everyone speechless. Chief Reynolds stepped into the center of the station and ordered every officer present to stand. Chairs scraped against the floor. Conversations stopped. One by one, the entire station rose to its feet. Daniel stood beside Lily, looking bewildered. Then the chief turned toward him and raised his hand in a formal salute. Every officer followed. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. The chief explained that the salute wasn't because Daniel was powerful, wealthy, or important in the traditional sense. It was because he had done something many people were too afraid to do. He had spoken up for someone who couldn't protect herself, refused to give in to intimidation, and remained respectful even when he was treated without respect. The chief apologized publicly for what had happened to him and, more importantly, promised Lily that her father had done the right thing. Daniel tried to hold back his tears, but Lily hugged his waist. For the first time that day, she wasn't looking at her father as someone who had been humiliated. She was looking at him as the strongest person she knew. Weeks later, the investigation uncovered a pattern of misconduct and missing reports. The elderly woman Daniel had helped receive justice, and the officers responsible for mistreating Daniel faced disciplinary action. Daniel was later invited to speak at a community event, but he didn't talk about himself. He talked about Lily. He said that every child learns what courage looks like by watching the adults around them. He wanted his daughter to remember that courage wasn't always shouting or fighting. Sometimes courage was simply standing calmly for what was right when everyone else wanted you to sit down and stay quiet. Daniel never became rich. He never sought fame. He continued repairing heating systems and coming home tired, but something had changed. Lily began keeping the torn pieces of that complaint inside a small box in her bedroom. Years later, she would still remember that rainy day, not because two officers tore up her father's complaint, but because she watched an entire police station stand up and salute the men who refused to let humiliation turn him into a bitter person. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Bright Heart. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. Before we end, I have one special request. Comment, kindness never fails, if you believe that doing the right thing still matters, even when nobody is watching. Because sometimes, the people society overlooks are the very people who deserve the greatest respect. And sometimes, the strongest person in the room isn't the one wearing the badge, it is the person who can be treated unfairly, stand back up, hold his daughter's hand, and still choose to remain good.